Jonas had always been good at falling into trouble, which was why he now found himself crouched behind a crate that smelled faintly of burnt circuits and alien spices, trying not to breathe too loudly in a sector of the station that didn't particularly like humans. The hum of machinery and the occasional metallic clang echoed through the narrow corridor, and Jonas imagined himself as some sort of hero in an old Earth action movie, except in those movies, the hero usually had a plan. He had no plan. His only thought was, don't get caught, and maybe, just maybe, don't trip over your own feet. That's when he saw them. At first, he thought he was hallucinating from the recycled air. Three figures, moving with the elegance of dancers but the precision of trained soldiers, were slipping between security patrols. They looked human enough, skin tones that might have been earthly, hair cascading like human hair, but their long ears twitched like the antennae of some delicate, high-tech insect, catching every sound, every breath. One of them paused, glanced at him, and raised an eyebrow so perfectly arched that Jonas had to fight the urge to wave awkwardly and say, "Hi, nice ears." Before he could decide whether that would be clever or incredibly stupid, a small voice, sarcastic and slightly amused, cut through the corridor. "You planning to hide there all day, human, or are you going to help?" The one with the voice had hair that shimmered like liquid silver, and her eyes were sharp enough to make him feel like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test. Jonas swallowed. Help with what?" he asked, realizing halfway through the question that he didn't actually know. "Escape," said the second, the stoic one with midnight blue hair and ears that seemed to sense the air itself. "And we could use someone who trips over security drones without setting off alarms." Jonas blinked. "Wait, so you want me to escape with you?" The third, mischievous with emerald green hair that caught the light in ways Jonas suspected defied physics, grinned and twirled a tiny gadget between her fingers. "Yes, and before you say no, let me just tell you that if you refuse, the guards will probably notice you and your death will be messy, or hilarious depending on perspective." She winked. "We vote hilarious." He hesitated, imagining his funeral floating somewhere in zero gravity, humans and aliens alike arguing over who would read his eulogy. That settled it. He nodded. "All right, I'm in. I mean, not that I have a choice." The escape began with Jonas fumbling more than the aliens liked, but they didn't scold him. Not directly. Instead, they used subtle telepathic nudges, glancing at him like a conductor guiding an orchestra, while he accidentally drifted into a wall, collided with a control panel, and nearly tripped a security drone that hummed suspiciously close. One of the women, he later learned her name was Lyra, snorted and whispered, "If you survive this, I'll buy you alien coffee. It tastes like burnt metal, but we promise the cream is optional." The corridor twisted into a zero-gravity section, and Jonah's panic set in when his boots failed to stick. He flailed, spinning like a cork in a wine bottle. The three women moved effortlessly, their long ears twitching as if the air itself carried secret currents they could read. Lyra floated past him, hand extended. "Seriously, human, hold on. You're ruining our aesthetic." Jonas grabbed her hand, and in the momentary weightlessness, he discovered that the laughter of aliens could be both beautiful and slightly terrifying. The silver-haired one, whose name he would later learn was Selene, drifted behind him, rolling her eyes but clearly amused, while the green-haired one, Zara, zipped ahead, tinkering with a panel until the security drones went haywire in a display of lights and sirens that made Jonas question his sanity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of floating, crashing, and narrowly avoiding an electric net, they reached an airlock. Lyra pressed a hand to the control pad, and the lock hissed open like a sigh of relief. The trio floated out into the corridor beyond, and Jonas, trying to follow, misjudged the push and shot across the hallway, landing in a heap against the far wall. "Impressive entrance," Selene said dryly. "Do you practice that?" "Every day," Jonas muttered, trying to disentangle himself from his own limbs. "In the mirror, very motivational." Zara giggled and flipped a switch that deactivated the nearby security drone, which twitched, spun, and then collapsed dramatically. "We like human theatrics," she said. "Very authentic." They moved as one, through airlocks and maintenance shafts. Jonas slowly learning that the long ears were not just for show. They sensed vibrations, air currents, even the tiniest hint of danger from 100 meters away. It was disorienting and fascinating, and Jonas found himself wanting to ask 100 questions about how they worked. Questions that, if asked aloud, might earn him a light zap or a mischievous glare. By the time they reached the outer hangar, the trio had already commandeered a small transport vessel, cobbled together from parts that shouldn't have functioned together but did. Jonas blinked at it. Is this spaceworthy?" Lyra tapped the hull with a long, elegant finger. "It'll fly. Maybe not elegantly, but it'll fly. You, on the other hand, will just have to hold on and try not to die." As the engines roared and the hangar doors opened to the void of space, Jonas grabbed a strap, his stomach performing acrobatics he had never thought possible. The three alien women floated around him, hair drifting, ears twitching, and expressions ranging from amused to seriously calculating. He realized with no small amount of awe that he was in way over his head. And yet, despite the chaos, despite the constant near-death experiences, he couldn't help but laugh. Somehow, in a universe that had always been hostile and incomprehensible, he had stumbled into something thrilling, terrifying, and absurdly, gloriously alive. Space outside stretched infinite and silent, and Jonas had the sinking suspicion that getting out of this adventure alive would be just the beginning of a much stranger journey. The alien women might have escaped captivity, but he was beginning to realize that he might be the one who was truly caught, by them, by fate, and by a situation that promised no end to danger, humor, or, strangely, unexpected friendship. And then Zara floated up beside him, smirked, and said, "Try not to scream when we hit the atmosphere. It's unflattering." Jonas blinked, grinned, and held on tighter, already knowing that life with these aliens would be absolutely, ridiculously unforgettable. Jonas woke to the faint hum of the asteroid settlement, a place that smelled like burnt ozone and alien spices in equal measure, and immediately realized that zero-gravity sleeping was both terrifying and oddly uncomfortable. He rolled over, flailing slightly in his makeshift hammock, and heard the quiet laughter of the three women. Lyra hovered nearby, levitating a mug of something that steamed suspiciously, ears twitching as she watched him untangle himself from the straps. "Good morning, human," she said, tone dripping with amusement. "Try not to drool into your helmet, it's unbecoming." Jonas groaned. "I don't even have a helmet on." Selene, sitting cross-legged on a floating crate with her midnight blue hair trailing like a comet, smirked. "Details. Minor details. The principle remains the same." She stretched, and her ears flicked with an alertness that made Jonas feel like a particularly incompetent spy. Zara zipped past, tinkering with a small device that looked like it shouldn't have existed outside of a science fiction manual. "You slept through the most important part of the day," she said gleefully. "Breakfast. And by breakfast, I mean survival protocol with a side of chaos." She pushed a panel that triggered a soft holographic display. A map of the asteroid settlement appeared, glowing in midair, along with animated little icons representing security drones, wandering merchants, and suspicious-looking alien creatures. Jonas blinked at it. Survival protocol." Lyra's ears twitched in amusement. "Yes, you may have helped us escape, but this place is, let's call it, quirky." She floated closer, her hands producing tiny gravity fields that manipulated small objects in the air. "And in quirky places, you either adapt, or you get eaten by some creature that looks cute but can digest a human in 7 minutes flat." Jonas swallowed and nodded. "Right, adapt, got it." Over the next few hours, he realized that adapting meant learning things that defied his human logic. Gravity shifts were the least of it. Selene demonstrated how she could alter it slightly around herself, making her movements almost like gliding, while Lyra taught him how to manipulate air currents to reach higher platforms, if he didn't crash into walls first, of course. Zara, meanwhile, had invented some kind of holographic alert system that let them know when the asteroid's more hostile inhabitants approached. Jonas, naturally, activated it accidentally while trying to scratch his head and set off a chain of flashing lights, alarms, and a robotic bartender that started yelling, "Intruder! Intruder!" "You're helpful," Zara said, barely suppressing a laugh as Jonas frantically waved his hands. Very human and very loud. By midday, Jonas had learned the first real lesson. The alien women had a sense of humor that thrived on his incompetence. Every attempt he made to show skill or bravery resulted in some form of gentle, or not-so-gentle, teasing. He tried to pilot a small drone to scout the settlement and ended up crashing it into a stack of cargo containers. Lyra floated past, ears flicking, and said, "Impressive. If your goal was to create a domino effect, you succeeded spectacularly." But despite the chaos, Jonas saw the women's competence in full force. They navigated the asteroid settlement with a combination of subtle telepathy, technological wizardry, and strategic planning that made Jonas feel both useless and awestruck. They could manipulate light, gravity, and electronic systems almost at will, turning every mundane obstacle into a playground for their skills. And yet, they laughed through it all, teasing Jonas relentlessly while keeping him safe from every danger he couldn't even perceive. Hours passed. Jonas, exhausted and slightly fried from the sensory overload, floated down a corridor only to be intercepted by Zara, who had a playful grin plastered across her face. Ah, trying to escape again. Bold. Futile but bold. She nudged him toward a small maintenance bay. Jonas froze. "Escape? No, I wasn't." Lyra interjected, voice calm but sharp. "We're not letting you leave. Not because you can't, but because it's inconvenient for us otherwise." Jonas's brain stuttered. "Wait, what?" Selene crossed her arms, a smile tugging at her lips. "You helped us, and now you're part of the equation. Leaving would create logistical problems. Plus, you're amusing, admit it." Jonas tried to argue, but every time he opened his mouth, the women countered him with some form of gentle trap. A gravity shift that pinned him lightly against a wall, a holographic net that forced him to twirl in midair, or a sudden electronic lock that left him dangling from the ceiling while they floated around, grinning. By the time he managed to get down, Lyra was holding a cup of that mysterious steaming liquid. "Drink, it's nutritious." "Maybe." He accepted it, grimacing, and realized slowly that leaving was going to be far more complicated than he imagined. The alien women had turned his attempts at freedom into a series of escalating jokes, each more elaborate than the last, each highlighting his human clumsiness and their own extraordinary abilities. And yet, despite the frustration, Jonas found himself laughing more than he had in months. As evening approached, the settlement's twin suns cast an eerie golden glow through the translucent domes. Jonas floated alongside the women on a small observation deck, watching the asteroid's jagged surface shimmer and the distant void stretch infinitely. He tried to hide it, but he felt a strange sense of belonging he hadn't expected. Zara nudged him gently. "You know, human, if you stay here, life will be unpredictable, exciting, and occasionally mildly terrifying, but never boring." Jonas exhaled, leaning back into the observation rail, ears twitching in sympathy with the alien's own. "Sounds like a plan," he muttered, though in his heart he wasn't sure if he meant it fully. Lyra laughed softly, nudging him with her shoulder. "Oh, you mean you're accepting that you're stuck with us? Don't worry, it'll be memorable. Especially when we start the mandatory human hero training tomorrow." Jonas groaned, already imagining the chaos, the pranks, and the narrowly avoided disasters. Somehow, between the laughter, the teasing, and the alien ingenuity, he knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And for the first time in a long while, being trapped didn't feel entirely bad. The stars outside blinked patiently, infinite and indifferent, And Jonas realized that freedom, he learned, was sometimes a lot more complicated than just escaping, and far more entertaining when you were caught with aliens who refused to let you go. Jonas was beginning to suspect that escape was no longer an option, and by suspect, he meant it had become abundantly, hilariously clear. The asteroid settlement had turned into a playground of chaos orchestrated by three alien women who were equal parts genius, mischief, and sheer determination. He floated through the narrow corridors of their temporary home, dodging gravity pulses from Lyra, playful holographic traps from Zara, and Seleni's perfectly timed sarcastic commentary. Somehow, despite the constant pranks, he had grown accustomed to the rhythm, the absurdity, and the sheer unpredictability of life with them. The day began with what Jonas assumed would be training, which Zara had insisted was necessary for him to be considered a proper member of their little cohort. He had quickly realized that the training was part practical skill, part endurance, and part comedy. He tried piloting a small reconnaissance drone, only to have it hack into the settlement security network and start broadcasting a series of animated dance routines to every surveillance terminal. Lyra floated by, sipping a mug of alien liquid that smelled faintly like burnt metal. "Impressive," she said dryly. "If our enemies are distracted by dancing drones, you've already won the war." Jonas muttered under his breath, trying not to topple into the floor. "I feel like I'm failing spectacularly." "You are," Selene said from a nearby gravity-shifted platform. "But don't worry. Spectacular failure is a highly valued human trait in this particular context." Her ears twitched as if she could sense his panic and amusement simultaneously. By midday, their home had become a fortress of laughter, levitation fields, and holographic distractions. Jonas discovered that his human ingenuity, which had seemed insignificant at first, had actually become crucial. He figured out the timing of rotating gravity nodes, manipulated malfunctioning security drones to act as temporary decoys, and even crafted a few improvised traps to help fend off the occasional bounty hunter who had been tracking the alien trio. Each time he felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by an embarrassing accident, like accidentally sticking a drone to his head and spinning helplessly through the corridor, before the women burst into laughter. It was during one of these chaotic defense drills that Jonas finally realized the truth. He was no longer merely their helper. He had become indispensable, woven into the fabric of their lives. Their gratitude had transformed into playful possession, and their teasing, though relentless, was tempered by genuine affection. The alien women, with their long ears twitching in constant alert, had created a reality where Jonas could no longer leave, not because they forced him, but because he wanted to stay, even if he hadn't fully admitted it. As the asteroid's twin suns dipped toward the horizon, casting long streaks of amber across the settlement, Jonas found himself floating on the observation deck, watching the distant void shimmer. Lyra nudged him gently. "You know, human, you've changed," she said, voice soft but teasing. "You've gone from panicking mess to slightly less panicking mess, but it counts." Jonas laughed. "Slightly less panicking, that's your compliment." Selene rolled her eyes, her usual stoicism broken by a rare smile. "It's honest, and honesty is rare in humans, or aliens for that matter." Zara floated beside him, ears twitching, grinning. "You've also developed patience. Incredible, improbable patience. It's terrifying how fast you've adapted to our chaos." He shook his head, smiling despite himself. "I think the patience developed out of sheer self-preservation." They all laughed, and Jonas felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the asteroid suns. It was the strange, electric warmth of belonging, of shared victories and narrowly avoided disasters. He had gone from being an accidental hero to someone who mattered, not just as a helper, but as part of a makeshift family bound by danger, laughter, and mutual respect. The next challenge came in the form of an unexpected bounty hunter strike. Jonas, Lyra, Selene, and Zara worked in seamless chaos, using gravity fields, holographic illusions, and clever misdirection to turn the attackers into a tangled heap of confusion. Jonas found himself at the center, guiding drones, improvising traps, and occasionally tripping spectacularly. Yet somehow, despite all the chaos, their plan succeeded. When the last bounty hunter floated unconscious into the void, Jonas was both exhilarated and exhausted. Lyra floated up, clinking her mug against his forehead. "See, you're officially a member now, heroism included. Misadventures guaranteed." Selene added, voice calm but approving, "You've earned your place here, human. And yes, leaving is no longer an option, unless you fancy an eternity of floating in space alone." Jonas grinned, leaning back and letting the gravity shift lightly around him. "I suppose I don't fancy that at all." Zara smirked, hovering just above his head. "Good, because the adventure is far from over. And now you're part of it for real." They laughed together, the sound bouncing off the metallic walls and drifting into the void beyond the asteroid. Jonas realized that his life had irrevocably changed. He was no longer the solitary, bumbling spacefarer. He was part of something larger, something unpredictable and alive. He had learned to adapt, to think quickly, to survive with humor and courage, and most importantly, to embrace the chaos with those who trusted him completely. As the asteroid settlement settled into quiet, punctuated by the occasional hum of machinery and distant cosmic twinkle, Jonas floated beside the women, feeling the weightlessness not as instability, but as freedom. He had been caught in a way, but it was a capture that he cherished. Heroism had brought him here, laughter had cemented his place, and adventure had become home. Lyra nudged him gently, Selene's eyes softened with approval, and Zara's grin was mischievous as ever. Jonas smiled, the absurdity and danger of his journey settling into a strange, comforting rhythm. He was no longer escaping, no longer panicking, no longer alone. He was exactly where he was meant to be. And for the first time, floating in the glow of twin suns and alien starlight, Jonas laughed freely, knowing that whatever the universe threw at them next, they would face it together. Chaos, humor, and heroism, all wrapped into one improbable, extraordinary life.